In the last video, we ended with the grand jury deciding that the case against Joe Bauguess and John Bauguess for the murder of Lester Bauguess would be heard by the court. And that was back on August 9th, 1932. So, this is Joe and this is John. The next time that the case appears in Superior Court records is on March 13th, 1933. March 13th, 1933. They appear in court for their case to be heard by a jury this time. And I believe that during the past 7 months, Joe and John were held in custody, but not necessarily in Wilkes. It may have been in Raleigh or maybe somewhere else in the state. And as the case gets underway, in this document here is the entire record of what I found about their jury trial. And I'll summarize it. As the case gets underway, Joe's attorney announced that his client would plead guilty to the lesser charge of second-degree murder. And my theory is that it became obvious that the evidence against Joe was substantial enough that it was in his best interest for the case not to be heard by the jury. And so Joe accepted the lesser charge of second-degree murder. As for John, he was also offered the opportunity to plead guilty to second-degree murder. But he said no, he would not accept a plea bargain. His trial would be heard by the jury. And there's only a sentence or two here that states this, but after the prosecution presented their case, the defense moved for a verdict of non-suit. And right here, a verdict of judgment of non-suit against John Bauguess. And that meant that the charges would be dropped for lack of evidence, lack of, any reason to continue the trial. The judge agreed, and John was free from that point. And I just want to summarize here. Joe's case was never heard by the jury. You know, he plea bargained for a lesser charge. John was a jury, but he was free. And now that was 9 months. 9 months after the shooting, John was free, and Joe was sentenced to not less than 10 or more than 15 years. So 10 to 15 years in the state penitentiary in Raleigh. Okay. Here's newspaper articles are always fun to read. They always have a little bit of flavor, add some character to these otherwise, I guess, less exciting court documents. This is a newspaper article from March 17th, 1933, just 4 days after the trial. And I'll read parts of it here. Let's see, afternoon sentence. Joe Bauguess, gray-haired Wilkes County farmer, to from 10 to 15 years in the state penitentiary for killing his son, Lester Bauguess. John Bauguess, charged jointly with his uncle in connection with the homicide, was set free. So that agrees with the court documents that we found. Bauguess entered a plea, talking about Joe, of guilty to second-degree murder. He is between 65 and 70 years old, admitting on the stand that he does not know his exact age. Well, we do. He was actually about 59 years old at the time of the trial. The younger Bauguess, talking about John, denied guilt, and at the end of the state's evidence, his counsel moved for a dismissal as of non-suit. The motion was allowed by Judge Schenck. Lester Bauguess was shot by his father June 13th of last year. And I always wonder what role John did play. I mean, was he just an innocent bystander? Maybe Joe was trying to place the blame on his nephew? Or did John actually do something and was able to, or maybe there was enough evidence, he was able to convince the court that he didn't have a role, but maybe he was in some way a part of the crime. But we'll probably never know. So that's the newspaper article. Over here, so Joe's on his way to prison. And this is Joe's commitment to state prison document. His sentence officially began, his 10 to 15 years, on March 6, 1933. And let's see a few other things. 10 to 15 years of murder. Okay, the next document is a prison record for Joe. It just mainly has some identifying information. It says he was received in Raleigh on March 22nd. So what, maybe, well, not even 2 weeks after his, or actually a week and a half after his trial, he was received in Raleigh. And it has some other information. Age, about 60. Height, 5'9.5". Weight, 151 pounds. The crime of murder. He was married. And some other identifying information. Okay, so that gets him into prison in March of 1933. The next document is his parole. This is dated 4/6/1936. So April of 1936, 3 years after being sent to prison, Governor Eringhouse paroled him. It says that he is now 60 years of age. Well, he was probably a few years older than that. And that he has made a good record since his confinement. I know this is very hard to read, but I'll highlight some of the important parts. So he was a good prisoner, and they decided to let him go after just 3 years of a 10 to 15 year sentence. And also on here it states that he should report to his parole officer at least once a month, and that he was officially released on April 15th, 1936. All right, so here he was paroled in 1936 after being in prison for 3 years. It didn't last, though. Revocation of parole. And this one is dated, where is the date? April 30th, 1938. So, his freedom lasted 2 years. He had violated the terms of his parole, and this document doesn't say how, and he was returned to Central Prison in Raleigh. I've heard, though, that he was caught at a liquor still, and that was the reason for his parole being revoked. So he went back to Raleigh in 1938. So now we're at, what, 6 years after almost 6 years after the shooting. Well, 8 months later, Joe died in prison on Christmas Day, 12/25/1938. Joe died in prison. This is a picture of Joe taken, I don't know if this was while he was maybe on parole or maybe before he went to prison altogether. But this is a picture of Joe taken at his house, and you can barely see his dog on the porch steps with him. A few things we can find here is that he did die at Central Prison Hospital. That was the informant of the death. And just 2 days later, on December 27th, 1938, he was buried in Wilkes County, and he was buried in the family cemetery, which was actually on his own land, just north of on the north side of his house. He died of a heart attack. Coronary occlusion is the official cause of death. So, that is what I know about the murder of Lester Bauguess. If you have any more information about Joe Bauguess, and especially about the murder of his son, I'd love to hear from you.